Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com. It's Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here, hanging out with Wilson Alexander for the third podcast in a row.
I know. How great is this?
Yes, that's what they call a hat trick in hockey, which I know you're not a big fan of.
I went to one hockey game as a kid. Those who don't know me, from Atlanta. We used to have the Thrashers there.
Yeah.
So I went to one game and got a stomachache because I ate sushi.
Well, you should have known better, first of all, because it's not a hockey hotbed, I don't think. But
no,
that's fair. You should have stuck to golf. See.
I can't. Yeah.
But you got preempted by Rab. So Wilson has come dressed like it's summer. I have come dressed like it's winter, I guess. The reality is that it's spring, and how do we know that? LSU just finished off the spring game, so we need to get our act together, get our wardrobe together. But we have everything else together. We're gonna discuss the LSU spring game, fallout, what we took away from it, what we learned from it, and what is still to come, obviously, during the summertime. So Wilson, how was it? How you doing?
Doing well. The spring game was dynamic. No, I'm just kidding.
Said no one ever.
It was, pretty plain and vanilla, which I think is what we talked about going into it, what to expect. Schematically, they did not do anything super interesting. You did see, the differences in this run game. I think that's something as a fan who had not maybe seen spring practice like we had up close. You actually saw like, oh, wow, pulling guards and tackles and look at all this stuff that they're getting to the perimeter in the run game and counters and those sorts of things that they're going to be doing differently. So you saw a little bit of those things, but by and large, it was some of what we've seen during spring ball in terms of major issues at defensive tackle, sometimes the offense pushing things around. The defense certainly needs to get better, and there's areas of concern there. And the offense looks like it could be explosive. But also with it being a spring game, it's impossible, really, to draw any firm conclusions about much of anything. If people remember last year, Jaden Daniels was 10 of 11 in the spring game, which ended up being pretty representative of his season. But it wasn't like he was airing the ball deep like he ended up doing during the year. So it's a spring game.
That's exactly what I was going to say. In summation, it's a spring game. We will get into it a little bit more, though, just because we should. We'll get into the nitty gritty and go up and down the roster and see what we learn. But first, of course, a little bit of business. If you're listening or watching here on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of our other social platforms, you know that The Advocate's always been the number one destination for LSU sports. So please subscribe to The Advocate if you have not already, whether that's in print or digital. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe and stay up to date with everything going on campus. There's still a lot going on. Believe it or not, there is a baseball program that is still playing baseball on campus at LSU. They're struggling, I would think would be an apt thing to say. But there's also other news going on, obviously softball, and then the big news this weekend will be LSU gymnastics in pursuit of its first national championship. 3 runner-up finishes. I don't have Rab here to fact-check me on that. I think it's either 3 or 4, and I should know off the top of my head, but I don't, one way or the other. They're trying to chase down Oklahoma, and that will be the big news of the weekend. But there's always something going on campus, especially in the spring, and so to keep your arms all around that, you stay up to date with everything with our newsletter. You can get it sent straight to your inbox, to your phone, to your desktop, so you can sign up there, get all the headlines delivered. With the LSU newsletter, go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. As I said, we're here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We're here on all our social channels, but specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube, you should be able to find it. You can subscribe. That way you can catch us live every Monday and Thursday. If you don't catch us live, you can always catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. And if that's not how you dig your podcast, you can always do it the more traditional way, which is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for LSU Sports Insider. Okay, so Rab, listen to me. I'm thinking about Rab. We're all still jealous of Rab. He's making his way back from Augusta. Wilson, we as you mentioned, sort of at the top of the show here, 68 plays, as we suspected. Nussmeier looks sharp. The one thing we didn't touch on, or you didn't touch on at the top there probably, is sort of quietly maybe the most important thing, no major injuries.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The LSU got through this whole spring in great shape on that front, which is ultimately what you really want out of spring practice in a lot of ways. There was a couple guys who looked like they might have gotten banged up during the game, like Kamori Pimpton went down for a second. Kyle Parker went to the locker room at one point, but Parker came back out onto the sideline, and Pimpton went back into the spring game and ended up getting a couple catches. So, yeah, they are in good shape injury-wise as they go into the summer months. Continue to knock on wood, just because you never know what can happen. But they are in really good shape, and especially with like a guy like Zy Alexander who missed all of spring practice. He's expected to participate in summer workouts as of the last update that we had going into the spring. Maybe even get back onto the field by sometime during preseason camp, and so they're in good shape.
So, as you mentioned, Garrett Nussmeier, I will say, again, this is the spring game, so had he gone 2 of 7, maybe a little bit of cause for concern, but probably not, because you've seen enough of a sample size, not only with him in live action, but based on everything that his teammates and Brian Kelly and the staff have said about how well he has done this spring. But you didn't have to worry about him going 2 out of 7, because he went 7 of 7, 187 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Didn't spend a ton of time out there, as you might assume. But long story short, he looked like he was in command, as they said he has been throughout the spring.
Absolutely. The deep ball to Zavion Thomas for LSU's first touchdown in the game was, as Brian Kelly said, and I think it's a perfect word, quintessential for Garrett Nussmeier, because it's a 45-yard throw. He steps up in the pocket, but he's got an opening where it looks like, okay, it was like 2nd and 5, and so it looked like, okay, you could just run here, maybe pick up the first down real quick, slide, just get a couple yards. But Zavion broke open immediately, which we'll get to what that means for the defense in a minute. But Garrett kept his eyes downfield, like off platform, just slings it 45 yards on a rope. And easy throw in some ways, because Zavion was wide open. It's not like you're trying to fit that into a certain window, but to be able to do that kind of velocity, have that kind of velocity on a pass, off platform like that, is that's what Garrett Nussmeier brings to the table. You saw that in that throw in particular, and to finish 7 of 7, like you said, for 187 yards. He had another 40-plus yard pass to Kyren Lacy, then like around a 60-yard touchdown to Lacy, where again Lacy was wide open, but he hits him right on stride. You saw his arm strength in particular, and what this offense can do. Looks like it could be pretty explosive, certainly between the 20s. I mean, they were able to keep airing it out.
Caveat to this, as there are caveats all over the place to anything in a spring game, right? You did mention, no matter how you slice, it was a hell of a throw. Maybe 5% easier to make that throw to step up when you're not going to get rocked, because quarterbacks can't get tackled to the ground. We're very much picking nits here, because it was a hell of a play. There's just no doubt about it. Okay, so let's talk about some backup quarterbacks. Brian Kelly, after the fact, I'm not going to say he didn't mince words, because that seems a little too harsh, but he was pretty clear that, okay, these guys have some work to do. Ricky Collins, 6 of 12, 52 yards. A.J. Swan, of course, the transfer from Vanderbilt, who's got starting experience in the SEC, 4 of 9, 55 yards. And then Colin Hurley, who actually was not wearing a no-contact jersey, which I found interesting, 4 of 6, 77 yards. But the long and short of the matter is that Brian Kelly still feels like they got work to do.
They do. You saw it kind of throughout the spring that the main thing at quarterback was this competition for the backup spot. Garrett's lockdown QB1. We knew that going into the year. That's not a surprise. There was going into the spring, it was, can anyone push him?
Right. And
especially AJ as an incoming transfer, and it very clearly became, no one's going to push him.
Right.
But so now the problem, the question is, if Garrett gets hurt during the season, if you have to lose him for a few series or even for a few games, if something like that were to happen, what is your situation going to be, if you have to send in a backup? And at this point right now, LSU would be in trouble. That became very clear during this game, because you had Ricky Collins go in with the first team offense, and the offense kind of sputtered when it didn't have Garrett out there. And Ricky and AJ, they've got the whole summer, they've got preseason camp to continue to develop and get better and put LSU in a stronger position in terms of what it's got with its backup quarterbacks. But they're going to have to really do that because, as we saw during this spring game, and as we saw at other parts throughout practice over the last month, they, like you said, I think it's the best way to put it. They got work to do. They got to improve. And, there's certain things that both of them got to get better at. AJ, in large part, is just sort of more understanding of the offense. Joe Sloan said that when he's comfortable, he's played well this spring, but he's doesn't seem to yet be comfortable in a new offense. And that's probably going to be the key for him. And for Ricky, who's been in this offense for a while, it's continuing to develop in all facets as a passer. He's incredibly athletic. We saw him do something a little bit with his legs, during the spring game and other parts of the spring practice, but he's just got to continue to develop as a passer from the pocket.
That I'm speaking only for myself here, obviously, but I think was a little on the one hand, maybe not surprising given the notion that A.J. Swan has presumably only had 15 practices here at LSU. But it was a little surprising that, listen, there's a reason they brought this guy in. I wasn't so sure that they needed to bring a quarterback in or that they would bring a quarterback in. And you guys sort of convinced me that that was probably a good idea, right? Because you wanted some veteran, somebody who's got some, veteran experience or whatever. And, you would like to have thought, not that it was going to necessarily be decided for sure coming out of the spring. In fact, it probably wasn't going to be, but you would like to have thought, well, okay, he looks like a guy who you probably feel has got an edge in the backup race, and it didn't. At least Saturday, it didn't appear that he had separated himself from the other two. Anyway, we will move on. Kyren Lacy, you mentioned he had a couple of catches. That the official stat sheet, and I thought this looked goofy to me. It said he had 2 targets, 1 reception for 59 yards. He had more
That's
than
not
that,
accurate.
right? Yeah, can't be right.
So the stats from this game are all pretty wonky because LSU didn't have its full stats team out there.
Yeah, okay.
It was kind of rehearsing during the spring game too, kind of thing, on that regard. And so no, he had at least 2 catches
That's what I was thinking.
for probably, when you put them together, around 100 yards and a touchdown.
It felt more, watching the game live. It certainly felt like it certainly felt like it was more than 1 reception for 59 yards, which is what the official stat sheet says. But it also felt like, well, okay, just sort of his presence on the field matched what we had heard and what you had seen in terms of him seemingly taking that chance where he's, quote unquote, the number 1 receiver or the number 1 returning veteran, and really sort of turning that corner and making that turn up. And I don't know anything else you want to sort of say about what Kyren Lacy. It sort of matches what he did this spring, does it not?
It does. It absolutely does. We saw him take over practices. We saw him be LSU's go-to receiver, and he did that here in the spring game.
Right.
The first reception set up a touchdown, and then the second reception was a touchdown. And the first team offense, like we said, they only played 3 series, but he looked in total control out there. And that's what we saw throughout the spring. It's going to be, the next thing for him is just to see if that can sustain. Because we've seen, during games during his, earlier in his career, the last 2 years, struggle with some drops, especially early last season, although it really wasn't much of a problem the second half of the year. But now you don't have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas dominating attention from defenses. You are expected to be the guy. Right. And you're going to draw a lot more attention now. And so he's going to have to be able to handle that, continue to get separation, make plays, even when defenses are keying on him a little bit more, and continue to have steady hands. We asked him, I guess it was last week, earlier last week, kind of what he's going through right now in terms of trying to get better and all that sort of stuff. And he said the thing that he focuses on when he's out there is one singular thing: catching the ball, because he knows it used to be a problem. He says, I want to be the best receiver to come through here, which is a very lofty thing, but that's, what he's trying to strive for this season. And he said he knows that he's got to eliminate the drops. And we haven't seen him during the spring. So now he's just got to continue to do that into preseason camp. And if he does, then he'll probably end up having a pretty good season. He
seems to have done all the right things in the spring, and he seems to be saying all the right things, because as we saw, last year and really even the year before, we've seen him fight for catches. We've seen him fight for yards. He's got all the physical skills. It's just a matter of sort of putting it all together. And I will say, before we move on, previous podcasts, I made mention of I wasn't really sort of counting on seeing much from Zavion Thomas and C.J. Daniels. Maybe I was being a little short-sighted on that, just because, well, okay, they just got here and it's spring and so on and so on. And I understand they're both experienced and all that, but a lot of times the light bulb doesn't sort of come on until they come back for the fall. Well, this spring and in the spring game, they certainly looked the part in much the same way that Kyren Lacy looked the part. Like they expect those 3 receivers to look next year when they suited up.
Yeah, Zavion, I mean, like we've said for a while, LSU brought in those 2 transfers for a reason. They have experience in a room that didn't have a lot past Kyren. And Zavion, as we kind of saw over the last half of spring practice, started getting a lot more rotation with the ones. Obviously made that play. He was wide open. It was a coverage bust. But you could see his speed in that moment. We saw him at least sort of catch some punts, not really do anything in the punt return game, but he was out there, which shows that he's sort of put himself in line to be that punt returner, which is what you would expect based on what he did at Mississippi State. And then, I think LSU will continue to get him more involved when they actually start to show some of what their offense really can be in totality. I mean, he can, take the ball in jet sweeps and catch screens and things like that. We saw them do a little bubble screen with Aaron Anderson. He's a similar sort of style of player. And, then CJ, again, didn't maybe get as much early run with the first team offense. And that's kind of representative of what we saw this spring, where he was usually with the twos and would rotate some with the ones. I think that's part of him just having to get up to speed with the new offense. And that, like you said, come preseason camp, they fully expect that light bulb to turn on and him to be, fully grasp what they want him to do. But you saw, even when in a few moments, you saw his experience come through. You saw the hands come through. He had, I think, maybe 3 catches in this game, and you saw that this is a guy who, is pretty close to getting to a point where they're going to be able to rely on him. And that's 3 in a room that showed its depth a little bit. I mean, Chris Hilton had a target deep down the sideline, ball that he should have caught down there, but he is still certainly heavily involved, and that's kind of your top, I guess, 4 at this point. And like we said, saw a little bubble screen to Aaron Anderson. There's 5. Right. Shelton Sampson was at least involved. And Kyle Parker, like we said, it looked like he maybe got banged up, had to go to the locker room, came back. So like we said, kind of going into this game, LSU is anywhere from maybe 5 to 7 deep at receiver. And whether or not it actually gets to 6 or 7 kind of depends on the development of some of these younger guys during preseason camp.
And you'll have running backs. They didn't have many running backs on Saturday, but you'll have running backs to swing it out too as well. So,
we saw some good stuff from those running backs.
I agree. Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring it up just for 10 seconds here. This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com, and we've always been the #1 destination for LSU sports. So please subscribe if you have not subscribed already, whether that's in print or digital. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Please sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with everything and get all the headlines sent straight to your inbox. To do that, you can go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter to sign up for the LSU newsletter. We are here again every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We're here on all our social channels, but specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Please search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube. You should be able to find it. You can subscribe. You can catch us live there every Monday and Thursday. And, of course, if you don't catch us live, you can catch us anytime after the fact on that same YouTube channel. And you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for LSU Sports Insider and give us a 5-star rating while you're at it, just for fun. So let's talk about, we discussed that the offensive line should be a major strength of the 2024 LSU football team. Limited action, but they looked the part. They did exactly. But again, we do have a little bit of meat on that bone in terms of what we can discuss, because we said beforehand going into the spring game, and based on what you'd seen in the spring, that, because of personnel, because the line is strong, because it's Jaden Daniels a quarterback and not Garrett Nussmeier, that you're going to see more of a traditional ground game. And that's exactly, again, they're not going to put a lot on tape, and they didn't put a lot on tape in this spring game, but you did see some of that, old-fashioned football, pulling guards, pulling tackles, traps, all those types of things. Just, tell us what you saw, and then tell us what Brian Kelly thought of it all.
Yeah, I mean, you say traditional, but in some ways it is sort of a modern rushing attack. You see, I think the San Francisco 49ers and the Shanahan sort of system do some of these things. And it's, it's using the athleticism and experience of this offensive line to their advantage, and trying to build this whole offense around the run game. You asked what Brian Kelly thought of it. He was asked afterward sort of generally about, I think the question was maybe explosive plays, which LSU had quite a few of in this game, in this scrimmage, I guess. And he said that that's all going to build on the offensive line, and that this is a offense that is not going to be effective unless it is able to run the football behind that offensive line. It was probably the most insightful sort of summation that we've had of LSU's offensive approach this season, what that's going to be that we've gotten yet. It was probably the most concise way that anybody's put it to this point, which is, LSU is going to try to run the football, control the line of scrimmage, and then build explosive plays off of that. Whereas last year, they were just explosive kind of whenever they wanted to be,
Right.
throwing the ball downfield. And maybe they still are in some ways. Like we saw what Garrett Nussmeier's arm strength can do for you. We saw what these wide receivers who are pretty fast can do when they stretch the field. Like that might end up being fine anyway. But they still want to be able to build all of that off of a foundation of this offensive line and this run game. And we saw that kind of start to come, some signs of that come to fruition here in the spring game. 2 runs in particular, there was in the red zone period that they did sort of before the full scrimmage, which, as a quick side note, LSU's offense is going to have to get much more efficient in the red zone. They weren't super crisp in that area of the field on Saturday. They weren't even like a fantastic red zone team last year at times. I don't think like any cause for alarm or concern at this point because it was all just sort of scripted stuff. And but they are going to have to get crisp in that part of the field here in the offseason. That's probably one thing if you look at this offense going out of out of the spring game, like they need to circle that as an area to keep getting better. But there was one play where I think it was the same play that Caleb Jackson scored on later, sort of like, pulling guards through the right side, used Josh Williams right behind him, maybe on some kind of counter action. And I mean, he was like untouched to the end zone.
Yeah.
And then he had a great juke on Jordan Gilbert to finish off the run. And then later, like I said, Caleb Jackson, very similar kind of thing. Mason Taylor starts coming across the formation in a motion. Garrett Dellinger pulls out of his spot at left guard. They come through the right side of the offensive line. Dellinger handles whoever the defensive end was on that side. I think it was Deshaun Womack. And then Mason Taylor sort of just seals Harold Perkins away from the play and gives Caleb Jackson a massive hole on a counter. And he just outruns Sage Ryan to the end zone. And that was super encouraging of your LSU's offense, and not so much of your LSU's defense.
Joe Gibbs was smiling ear from ear to ear, looking down on that. One thing that but I was about to get into the defensive line and the defensive tackles, which of course is sort of one of the topics du jour, one of the favorite topics du jour.
Kind of all that matters moving forward.
That and corner, I would say, but and maybe punts, maybe the punter. But before we do that, you had asked me actually in the previous podcast about what I wanted to see, and I was curious about the offensive line, the backups, the second team. I was curious to see what you thought about those guys, how they did. And again, this is all, Brian Kelly said, we'll get to this too. Brian Kelly says, like, this was the most basic defense of all time, basically. Didn't say quite those words, but, it's a spring game. You're not going to show anything. You're not going to put something on tape. So it's always difficult to evaluate this stuff, but just, hey, what do we think about this?
The backup offensive line? It has work to do.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. LSU is established on its starters, but if one of them were to go down, or God forbid, 2 of them were to go down, you had injuries, which LSU was quite fortunate with last year on the offensive line. They could be in trouble a little bit. You'd suddenly have a weak spot, a weak link on that offensive line, and they're going to have to continue to shore up that depth and develop those guys, especially when you start to look forward to not in those sort of in case of emergency scenarios this season, but actual starters next season.
Right.
You got to get those guys up to speed and get them ready.
Right.
We saw some good things from Tyree Adams this spring, maybe some good things from Bo Bordelon as well. But a lot of those other guys are freshmen. And while Brad Davis has recruited well in terms of, bringing talent here, now you got to get that talent ready to play over time. And the second team defense won the day for when you talk about the matchup between the backups. Gabriel Reliford, gosh, he had 2 sacks, 3.5 tackles for loss, a couple of hurries, and that was against the backup offensive line. Dylan Carpenter had a sack against the backup offensive line. On the edges in particular, it seemed like the second team defense was getting after it. When we talk about the quarterbacks, they were under duress a good bit, never able to really feel comfortable in the pocket, whereas Garrett really was, and that might have influenced their day to a degree as well. And so, but it also goes to show that Brad Davis and the rest of the staff is going to have to keep working on that backup offensive line throughout the year in case of emergency and in preparation for 2025.
Ricky Collins, and I'm putting this in air quotes, he got sacked 5 times, by the count. The whistle blew the play dead 5 times, which sort of speaks to what you're saying about the edge rushers had a day against the second team offensive line. Looking again now, let's talk about, again, the topic du jour, defensive tackle. Brian Kelly, I'm directly quoting here, quote, "We have to really evaluate and recruit the defensive tackle position. That's a must," end quote. And this is not revelatory here. This is not some sort of breaking news. We've been talking about this basically since Wingo and Mason Smith hit the road. So in many respects, nothing's changed. But listen, the transfer portal opens Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yep.
Tuesday.
April 16th.
They're going to have to do some shopping, and he made no bones about it.
No, I mean, I asked him last Thursday, what is and I guess we talked about this on the podcast last Thursday. I can't remember, but either way, it's kind of all that matters right for over the next couple of weeks is are there any positions other than defensive tackle that you want to pursue in the transfer portal? And he said, nope, nothing else that we need. And so it is I'm trying to think of the right appropriate words to describe how much of a need this is. It is the priority.
It's priority number
focus.
one for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure. If another position pops in there and there's like a player from another position who you have a connection to and who you like and think's going to upgrade your team, then, it's worth probably pursuing at like corner or maybe even running back. Although I'm not sure if they're going to necessarily go after a running back in the end. We'll see. Like he obviously didn't indicate that they would. So it's all on defensive tackle right now. Because when we look throughout they're out practice over the last month, and then you saw it again in the spring game. LSU is not good enough at defensive tackle right now, and they don't have enough depth, they don't have enough experience, and they've just got to get a heck of a lot better there. And they are, they've already signed Gio Paez from Wisconsin. They've hosted Philip Bliddy from Indiana over this past sort of weekend or so. And so that's potentially two. We'll see who else ends up hitting the portal once that thing opens. Expected to be a lot busier of a spring portal window than there has been in the past. Usually not a lot of guys hit the portal in the spring over the last few years because a lot of that action happened in December. It's expected to be much busier. You had a lot of coaching changes that happened in January, a lot of major ones that happened in January. You've also got guys that are allowed to transfer 2 times and play immediately. There's a lot of factors right now that contribute to this expected to be quite a busy portal window. So there could be quite a few options in there, and LSU is going to have to go after some really good ones because they need to upgrade their defensive tackle. That is what matters more than anything over the next 2 weeks. Like you mentioned corner. That's more of like a developmental thing over the offseason, most likely, because they're probably not going to add, anybody unless it's like a major difference maker, like I said, who hits and they have a chance to go get them. Over the next couple of weeks here, the only thing that matters is adding defensive tackles, and they got to go out. They got to get it done.
You made mention that there almost will certainly be more players in general out there in the portal this go round for all the reasons you said, but also because, and it's not to say that this wasn't a factor beforehand, but hey, look, the NIL world is, continuing to develop and expand and explode and so on and so forth. And so now I think it's just, as the years go by, unless there's some sort of grand sweeping change, you're going to see lots of players, lots of athletes who say, wait a minute, I'm 2-time all conference. I can go out there on the market and probably get a better deal for myself. And so whether that winds up being the case as to why there are potential fits for LSU moving forward at defensive tackle here in this spring transfer window, one way or the other, just if there's anybody out there, and I'm quite certain that everybody will be looking, if there's anybody out there who's, 1 or 2-time all conference, wherever they are, at the in the defensive interior, then that's going to be, target 1, 2, 3, and 4 for LSU.
Yeah, and it's going to be target 1, 2, 3, and 4 for a lot of other teams. Defensive tackle,
that's right.
That's the thing. They're going to have to fight to get some guys because defensive
They're
tackle
always at a
is
premium.
Exactly. And LSU has some is going to have some capital to be able to use on the NIL front. And with that position, you mentioned Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo didn't come back, so like you would think whatever they were probably going to be owed, like you had that allocated, and so now like you can probably direct that toward their replacements and that kind of thing, and so that should help. But having Bo Davis should help. He's a fantastic recruiter with a very good reputation of development, and so they are. I guess they have some, and they also can just pitch playing time.
Yes.
Like, come in here, you can play. Like I talked to Gio Paez last week, and that was one thing that was told to him in the recruiting process. Like, you're going to get a chance to play here very quickly, which mattered to him as a guy who has 1 year left of eligibility and wants to, make a difference and help maybe give himself a chance to make the NFL. And so LSU's got some good selling points for these potential defensive tackle recruits, and it's going to have to use them.
So we did get it into corner just a little bit here the last couple of minutes. But yes, another quote here, direct quote from Kelly, quote, "We have to figure out what our cornerback situation is going to be," end quote. Again, this is sort of what we've spoken about more or less a lot of this spring. they've got guys. It's just a matter of figuring out who the guys are going to be. Does that make any sense in terms of depth? I mean, a year ago at this time, it's like, wait a minute, these guys are really, really, really thin at a position that they're typically excellent at. And now maybe they don't know whether they're going to be excellent, but they know that they have players who have a lot of potential and a lot of them. And so it's just a matter of figuring out who goes where and how that position is going to shake out.
Yeah, and it connects, of course, to the whole secondary sort of connects to each other in some ways, but particularly at corner, it's like when you talk about like putting it together, like the whole secondary, like they do got to figure out like, is Sage Ryan, the long-term, option there this season? Is Major Burns, fit at the star like they think that he does? Jordan Gilbert, is that, all those things. We saw Deshaun McBride, a freshman, make a few plays. Kylan Jackson, the backup star, flash in this game as well. Are they going to push for playing time? But at corner specifically, there is, like you said, options in terms of like guys on the roster who have now, most of them been on the team now for a year or so. But just nobody who's proven,
Right.
no proven difference makers. You go back to like what Brian Kelly said about the defense that they were using this game. Blake Baker, he said, ran like maybe 2 coverages. They sometimes blitzed the nickel, but it really was quite basic and vanilla because they didn't want to show USC anything. That being said, that ended up leaving these corners on an island a bunch. Blake Baker would like to play man coverage and put his cornerbacks on an island if he has the personnel capable of doing it. He said that. He goes, if you were to open me up, we'd be a man coverage team. But he knows that he also has to play to his strengths. And that's one thing that they may have further understood through this spring game is, okay, what their strengths and weaknesses are. It's not going to be a strength for them to just play man coverage on the outside. And that was the thing, like Brian Kelly mentioned, especially the Kyren Lacy touchdown, was maybe one thing that kind of came out of this game that even though it looked rough right there, that you can learn from it and apply it to the season is, okay, when we have going up against a receiver like Kyren Lacy, someone else in the SEC who's of that caliber, or throughout their schedule, the game plan for that, and be able to maybe bracket coverage and do some different things instead of just saying, all right, Ashton Stamps, PJ Woodland, go play man coverage against a guy who's more experienced than you, and at this point in your career is probably more a matchup problem for us. So they'll be able to do those things during the season and do some different things to not, they're not at the point where they just have the guys to probably go play man coverage, even though that's something they've been working on. And so that's probably one thing that you can kind of take from this game as a potential positive if it's used correctly. Okay, you learned what your personnel is capable of to some degree, so now you can figure out how to schematically game plan around that. In terms of who's going to be playing the position, we saw Ashton Stamps and PJ Woodland, the true freshman early enrollee, still with the first team defense.
Yep.
Ashton's been with the first team defense all year, or all spring, I should say. Javion Toviano's there. J.K. Johnston is there. And that's kind of your top 4 right now. We'll see exactly when Zy Alexander is able to play again. As at the moment, if they had a game tomorrow, like that would be your lineup, would be Ashton and PJ most likely. But throughout this competition is going to go for a while. And so we won't know for sure who's starting against USC until probably later on in fall camp. And then even at that point, it's subject to change based on how guys perform during games. I don't think this is something where you can just write into guys right now or even during preseason camp and be like, all right, that's their corners and they're set, because they have a lot of options who are not proven. And if somebody struggles, then somebody else is more likely to get a chance.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, because very specifically Brian Kelly himself mentioned it, whether we're talking about basketball, football, or whatever, defense, so much of defense is predicated on communication. Communication is key. And it sounds like on some of those long plays that we're talking about a coverage bust, they played it very simple, but I do remember Brian Kelly very specifically saying, hey, when you're supposed to be in a cover 3, you can't be playing cover 2, and that's why we got that problem. So
that happened on the Zavion Thomas touchdown, and that's something where it's like, okay, that's what you didn't want to see in the spring game.
That's right.
You get beat man-to-man, that happens. Like you said, like I said, like you can roll some coverages during the season and start to game plan for that, but you did not want to see them, like you referenced, be told to play cover 3, the call is cover 3, then you play coverage 2 and you have that bust. That was not good.
Right. That's a concern.
That's something that the coaches are going to harp on quite a bit when they break down this film in any team meetings that are coming this week.
That's exactly right. This was on April 13th, and so no cause for alarm just yet, but you got to make sure that you get that taken care of in the summer and the preseason camp. One last thing that we did actually discuss last week we all sort of kind of joke and laugh about it right up until the moment that it's a problem, which is the punting. And Brian Kelly, again, this was something that he mentioned post-game or post-scrimmage, post-spring, whatever you want to call it. Peyton Todd, 4 punts, 36-yard average, and it was very clear to probably everybody in the stands, but also Brian Kelly himself, that he was not pleased with how that turned out. Are we sure they don't go shopping for a punter instead, just as a little add-on in their shopping cart when the transfer portal window opens?
I'll be fascinated to see whether or not they do. If they don't add anybody, then they will be going with Peyton. That would be a vote of confidence for him. And also, though, it is sort of saying like, all right, they're comfortable in what they saw throughout the spring prior to the spring game. Because Brian Kelly said when asked about Peyton Todd after the scrimmage, is that he had punted well, during spring practice. But one thing they wanted to see in this was getting to Tiger Stadium, even though there was like hardly anybody there.
Right.
This is still a venue that, sort of elicits that, like, can you step up within this?
No, it's where you're going to do your work.
Exactly. And he was not as good as he needed to be. Brian Kelly said that very plainly.
Yes.
And said that Peyton knows that too, that he needed to do better in that setting. And so it is going to be interesting to see if LSU maybe pursues a punter. A couple of years ago, as we know, they added Jay Bramblett when Brian Kelly came in here, brought him down from Notre Dame with them. And Bramblett has since, he's out of eligibility. So here's Peyton Todd. He's getting his first chance at it, and he's just going to have to punt better. If he's going to end up being the punter during the season, it's going to have to get a lot better because he's got a powerful leg, but it was shaky, not accurate enough, and not getting enough hang time. And so, people are like, oh, it's really special teams kind of thing, but like it's gonna matter during the season if it's a problem. And they don't. The last thing you want is another special teams issue on this team when it hasn't been a strong suit over the last few seasons. And so, it's not to say like he's not the guy and this is a problem, but like clearly, for Brian Kelly coming out of this game, it was something that was not up to what he wanted to see, and something that he's going to have to at least think about, and the staff's going to have to decide exactly what it wants to do. They've got I think a redshirt freshman walk-on who could potentially be in the mix there. Also, their incoming place kicker signee is he's more of a kicker, but he punted some in high school too. So maybe that's another sort of option, but we'll just kind of have to see where they end up going with it, because that was one thing that sort of looked unsteady during this game.
It doesn't seem like, it frankly may not have been as much of a problem last year because LSU's offense was so explosive.
Yeah.
And they were going to score all the time, and Bramblett didn't get a whole lot of work, frankly. But then also on the flip side, hey, a bad punt gives them bad field position. Well, that defense is just going to give up those points anyway.
And the last thing you want to do when you got a defense that maybe can be better this year, but you're still in that rebuilding mode.
You don't want to handicap them.
Yeah, exactly. Don't put them in a bad position.
So we will see the transfer portal again. The transfer portal opens back up on Tuesday, and that will be the next step in LSU's offseason. Go ahead, Wilson.
Well, one thing that I don't know if I mentioned necessarily as we sort of trying to get ready for the transfer portal opening up, LSU's at, by my count, 87 scholarships after Jackson Howard told the staff last week that he would enter the portal. If my account's wrong, then it's at 88. So, okay, either 87 or 88. Right. And so they're going to have to, they are going to lose people. They're going to lose a couple players here. Everybody know there was attrition would have happened during the spring anyway. But in order to get to the 85-man limit by preseason camp, they're going to kind of have to be some attrition. So especially if they want to add, say, 2 defensive tackles, then they would need probably 4 to 5 players are going to have to leave, or there's somebody who would maybe take a medical retirement or something like that. There's going to have to be a few guys who there will be a few guys who are on the team this spring who are no longer part of the roster in the preseason, either because they're leaving on their own accord or because LSU needs to find the numbers. So that's there's going to be some comings and goings here over the next couple of weeks. LSU, I think, is in a position roster wise where it would be pretty surprising if there was like a large exodus of people, but there is going to be a few guys who decide to hit the portal
because they want playing time elsewhere, or because LSU
definitely
needs for them to. LSU needs to do a little bit of shedding because they're over, as you said. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That will all be part of the next step as the portal opens on Tuesday. And that'll be the next step for LSU's offseason. This, as we knew going into the spring, this roster coming out of the spring would not be the finished product, and it is not the finished product yet. And that will be the next step as we see going down into the spring, into the summer, as we get ready for summer workouts and, of course, preseason camp going into August. We will be here for it all. We will be back on Thursday in all likelihood. Well, not in all likelihood. We are going to discuss quite a bit of gymnastics. Hey, look. It's a national championship on the line here coming up this weekend for LSU at the NCAA championships in Fort Worth, Texas. So that's definitely worth talking about. And obviously that is a program that draws quite a big crowd these days. So we'll be back here on Thursday to discuss that. We're here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider on all our social channels, but specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube. Should be able to find it. Subscribe. That way you can catch all the episodes live, and if you don't catch them live, you can always catch them right there on that same channel after the fact. We are also here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. Just search for the LSU Sports Insider. And again, please subscribe to The Advocate. This is why we're here. This is why we do what we do. We give you the best LSU coverage around. So support your local journalist. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. And to stay up to date with everything up to and including gymnastics, baseball, softball, all that stuff, everything going on underneath the sun. And, hey, look, Angel Reese is going to go in the draft Monday night as well in the WNBA draft. So there's plenty to keep up with. Get all the headlines delivered straight to your inbox. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Again, that's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter to sign up for our newsletter. Wilson, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for pulling the trifecta here.
Absolutely,
three dates in a row.
Always happy
I
to
did
talk
see
football.
that you had good eating this weekend as you were
My
watching
wife
TV.
is incredible. She got me the taste of the Masters box. I've been drowning in pimento cheese, and it's great.
USOB.
I married well.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. She deserves all the credit she should get. Very well done. For Wilson Alexander and for Amelia Cotton behind the glass, my name is Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.